Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to Bulwark Sunday Live, also watchable when it's not live, shortly afterwards on YouTube, but now live on Substack. I'm very pleased to be joined by Tom Malinowski, contributor to the Bulwark, beginning with the most important biographical datum, but very senior official in both the Clinton and Obama administrations, National Security Council, State Department, Senate confirmed Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Is that the right name? If you're that division,
yes.
which Trump is closing down, already has closed down. I don't know. Yeah, in the Obama second term, a member of Congress then for 2 terms. Very unusual experience actually to have high-level experience in the executive and legislative branches. Kind of the Dick Cheney of our day, you know. That's what I think of that way. I guess he went in the opposite direction though, legislature then executive. Anyway, Tom has been followed Trump's foreign policy very closely, followed the trip to the Middle East that just ended Friday closely, and I thought we could really learn something by talking about the trip. So welcome, Tom. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Bill. Good to see you.
So the most notable, the most famous thing, I'm not sure the most important thing, but maybe it was important, the most important, but the most important famous thing about the trip, the Qatari Air Force One, and the quote gift of that. What about that? What is it? Is it more than just Trump wanting a what do they call it? A palace in the sky, or what are the implications?
Yeah, well, he sure does want one. So I think only part of this story is out, and there's some more shoes to drop. So the way this has been presented so far, at least, is that Trump is going to the Middle East. And all of these countries greet him with a gift. The Qataris say, "Oh, Mr. President, we know you like planes. Here's a plane." And the Emiratis say, "Sir, we know you love money. Here's $2 billion that we're going to give you and your family in this Bitcoin transaction." By the way, worse than the plane, in my view.
Yeah, interesting.
And then Trump says, "Well, I mean, who am I to turn down gifts? These are freebies. Who would turn down something free?" Which is by itself a really bad argument, and it's not playing well with most Americans. But I think there may be a little bit more going on here. I think this may be less of a bribe, where these countries just came up with these ideas themselves, and perhaps more of a shakedown, where in fact it was Trump and his envoys to the region before the trip happened who said, this is what he wants. You have to give him not just a plane, but this specific plane. To the Emiratis, well, the Qataris are giving a plane. What are you going to give? How about buying $2 billion of Bitcoin? And if that's true, then I think particularly the Qataris, who are in a vulnerable position for a number of reasons, may have felt like they actually had no choice, like they had to come up with this. And now, like, they look like the bad guys, and they in a way they shouldn't have done it. But I think the notion that an American president is actually demanding these personal gifts from foreign countries, if that's indeed what happened, and I think it is, makes this even worse. So I would expect to see more reporting in the coming days that explores that aspect.
No, that's very interesting. And I mean, in a way, though, you could say the founders were pretty prescient in putting into the Constitution the prohibition on foreign gifts or emoluments to any officer of the United States, because in a way, it's a little hard to know whether it's a bribe or a shakedown, or things can be partly bribes and partly shakedowns, right? I mean, you don't want to get, but people have sort of lost track of the fact the gift itself would seem to be in violation of the Constitution, even if there were no side conversation, which is kind of hard to believe there wasn't, about what might happen in return.
Yeah, and I like my sense from talking to people kind of close to the Gulf world is that they're used to corruption. They engage in a lot of it themselves, but they're still kind of amazed and disgusted that these demands are coming from the United States. Their attitude is like, yeah, we're supposed to do this, but you're not supposed to ask us to do this. What is happening here? And so, our image, even with the sheikhs of the Gulf state, has taken a hit, much less the criticism that Trump deserves to be getting from Americans on the left as well as the right, interestingly. Like, this is something that I think even a lot of his MAGA defenders have been unable to defend. But if I'm right, and the story becomes that he threw, and I think Steve Witkoff would have been the person to deliver this message. Steve Witkoff's son, by the way, runs the Trump family Bitcoin operation. So they're all kind of intertwined in these deals in that way. If it's true that he sent Witkoff to say, give him this plane, then I think the scandal goes up a few notches, even beyond what it is now.
I would think so. I mean, the Bitcoin is probably worth a whole separate conversation. I don't understand it, but people I know, you just said it in passing, say exactly what you said, that people I know who understand it. This is more of a scandal in a way than the plane, and less transparent, certainly, and more open-ended in the kind of total corruption that can follow from all kinds of foreign countries, governments, individuals, and of course, all kinds of individuals in the United States as well.
Yeah, every country sees this, and every country is facing some difficulty with Trump, beginning with tariffs, and the message implicitly and perhaps explicitly has been, you can get on his good side by buying this worthless token, which is what the Trump, they call it shitcoin for a reason. And it's just a way of putting money in his pocket. And like a lot of countries are going to do that. A lot of wealthy people around the world are going to do that because they're getting the message that this is the way to get favored treatment from the U.S. government. And I think there's, we can bemoan it. If I were a Democrat in Congress right now, what I would be saying, of course, I'd be denouncing Trump. I'd be trying to get a vote on this in the House and the Senate, which probably won't happen. What I'd also be saying is the moment Democrats have control of the House again, we will be holding incredibly painfully intrusive hearings into every attempted bribe of the US president and of our political system by foreign countries and foreign entities. And anything that smacks of a criminal bribe will be referred to the Justice Department, and the statute of limitations on this shit is 5 years. So the message to countries around the world should be that you may feel pressure right now to do this, but there's also some pressure on you not to do it because accountability is 2 to 4 years away.
And that's really important, actually, as people do ask, well, what could be done about this? And there's a certain defeatism, which I understand because some things can't be done, which should be done in the immediate, in the present. But that's could you call some of your former colleagues and get them to be a little more outspoken about this, and maybe ranking members of key committees,
Everything I suggest to you, I suggest to them, of course. But yeah, I know officials of some of these countries, and they hate being put through this, but they would hate even more the dirty laundry being aired, again, in excruciating detail by a congressional committee 2 years from now. So they need to be told. That's what's going to happen.
The fact that we just assume, of course, correctly, that it's inconceivable that the actual Justice Department of the United States under President Trump is going to look into this is telling, though, because, of course, you and I are old enough to remember when Bill Clinton's Justice Department appointed a special prosecutor who caused quite a lot of trouble, prosecutor, I guess it's called, special counsel, who caused quite a lot of trouble for him when Iran-Contra, before that, was investigated by the special, I guess, committee that Brent Scowcroft headed, set up by the White House, by the Reagan White House, was they under pressure, admittedly, from outside and from a Democratic Congress. The idea that, and this is true as you go through the Bush and Obama administrations, the idea that we just have no accountability at all from within the executive is actually bad. It does mean you then have to go to the sort of second resort, which is not nothing, but which is sort of especially if you don't control Congress now, which is, we'll have hearings that will expose this. Of course, assumes the Trump people show up if they're subpoenaed, whatever, and it's a real reminder. I am struck by that no one even thought, and I don't blame anyone because it's so ridiculous to think that when all this stuff starts to come out, or other things that Trump has done start to come out, that, Pam Bondi should take a look at it, right? Or have an independent, Trump's first term, incidentally, how do we know? How did the Mueller report happen? Because actually Sessions and his people were law-abiding enough to think that he had to recuse himself, and then Rosenstein was there and appointed Mueller to look into the questions about the firing of Comey and Russia and so forth. So there was, as recently as the Trump first part of the Trump first term, there was still a presumption of law-abidingness, you might say, within the executive branch.
Yes, that's true, and it's no longer true. And we have to accept that, but not, as you say, with a sense of helplessness, because there are other things we can do. And as much immunity as Trump may think he has, may actually have, there's a long history of people going to jail for that man, of enablers being held accountable. And I think this is where my Democratic friends in Congress need to be very explicit right now. The foreign enablers are very vulnerable.
Yeah,
they need to feel pressure from both sides. And even if some of them can't be prosecuted in the US, some can be, but even if they can't be, they can be sanctioned, they can be denied visas in the future, and they can be embarrassed. And this will be embarrassing for them when the full details come out. So yeah, that's something.
And a subsequent administration and even Congress can say we're not abiding by whatever deals were made, and so you're spending money for something that's only going to last 18 months or whatever.
100%. Yeah, we should be absolutely ruthless in previewing the worst that we can do, and in the meantime, got to keep talking about this, what's going on, and what some of these countries may be getting. Or what
we'll talk about that. So people talk about it correctly. I mean, to some degree, it's just, well, they're getting generalized goodwill from Trump, or kind of an IOU that he'll be not friendlier to their interests and claims later on. But you've been talking a little bit about more concrete things that Qatar, maybe, and the others as well, are getting, or they will be getting from this deal.
Yeah, so I think the most concrete and immediate thing is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, wants to, they know that oil and gas won't last forever. So the next thing they want to dominate is artificial intelligence. The Biden administration, with the support of a lot of Republicans, imposed curbs last year on the export to a lot of countries, including the Gulf, of the most sophisticated microchips that you need to set up to lead in the development of artificial intelligence. Trump just agreed to waive all of those restrictions. And the reason those restrictions were in place, well, number one, the UAE has very close ties to China. And we all know we don't want China to win the race for the future of AI. So the fear was that if you give these advanced chips to the UAE, the Chinese are going to get them. And number two, the UAE is a mass surveillance totalitarian dictatorship. And, we don't know what the future of AI is going to look like. Is it going to be helpful to humanity? Is it going to destroy humanity? Probably some combination. Because of that uncertainty, one thing we should all, I think, agree on is that the development of this technology should be led by democracies that have safeguards, that respect privacy, that are transparent, that have legislatures, that hold hearings when things go too far. The UAE is not that country. It's just the opposite. So for the president of the United States, who claims to be America first, to become complicit in helping this friend of China that has already kind of masterminded a surveillance-based dictatorship to, in effect, lead the world in developing this technology is absolutely crazy. And yet that's what's happening. That's what the Emiratis are getting for their gifts to the Trump family.
And Trump could just waive these by, they were put on by executive order, and he could waive them by executive order? Yeah.
Yes, they were demanded by bipartisan groups in Congress, particularly, there's the Select Committee on China in the House of Representatives that was led by Republican Mike Gallagher, Democrat Raja Krishnamurti. They were pushing the Biden administration to do this. The order divides the world into three kinds of countries: real allies of the US that are democratic, total enemies like North Korea and Iran, and then there's a middle group of countries where we said, you might get these chips, but there are conditions. You've got to have really strong safeguards when it comes to potential leakage to China, and you got to respect human rights and privacy. And obviously the UAE didn't meet either of those categories. Trump doesn't care. His family and associates are very much involved in some of the business deals that are going to ensue from the UAE becoming or trying to become the cutting edge, leading edge developer of AI, and they're off to the races. So
the degree to which the anti-China rhetoric, which I think has been obviously sincere on the part of some Republicans and some Democrats, and some of much of it, in my view, legitimate and important. And some of us were China skeptics before it was fashionable to be that, and China liberalization skeptics and concerned about human rights and other things. Having said all that, I don't know, is there any actual serious anti-China policy? I'm not anti-China, let's say containment or competition, more intelligent competition with China policy going on in this administration, or does it always yield to the commerce and to the
I think they would say, yeah, we just, we slap these massive tariffs on China. That's our anti-China policy. But then he caves, partially caves on the tariffs, which signals to Xi Jinping that he's not really serious. And I think the CCP on tariffs, they know that it hurts them, but they believe that it hurts the US, their main enemy, more.
Right.
And they're willing to swallow something that hurts us more than it hurts them. And beyond that, extorting our allies, threatening to get out of NATO, and potentially, when they get around to it, alliances with Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, the complete evisceration of USAID and of our soft power around the world, the attempted taking down of Radio Free Asia, which broadcasts free, uncensored news to the people of China. Like, this is like the CCP's wish list, and Trump is just going down and going check, 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 check. So yeah, it's not serious.
Amazing. No, that's really well said and important, I think. Meanwhile, Putin, another dictator who's launched the largest ground war, a brutal one, obviously, against Ukraine, the largest ground war in Europe in 80 years. Trump sometimes sounds a little exasperated with Putin and claims to be just trying to bring about a peace deal. What's your take on that? Also, there were developments on that last week. What's your take on that?
There's a lot going on there. And I think that there's an interesting story that we've seen play out the last few months involving pro-Ukraine people who are in Trump's orbit, including some Republican members of the House and Senate, working with our allies in Europe, working with influencers close to Trump, trying to get him to a less irresponsible place. His instinct is not to care about Ukraine, not to understand the stakes involved in this conflict, to align with Putin. That's what he would do without any constraints. And so they've been trying to, in a sense, manipulate him to a point where he'll be tougher on Putin than on Zelensky. So you have the mineral deal, which was a way to get him interested in Ukraine by dangling something he would care about, money, minerals. And that was risky because you saw Trump trying to twist that into something that would be totally exploitative to Ukraine, but they finally managed to get that to a good place. There was a lot of work behind the scenes to recover from the terrible Zelensky meeting in the White House, after which, as you know, Trump suspended intelligence cooperation and really hurt Ukraine badly. And that work was paying off. And the choreography in the last 2 or 3 weeks was as follows. The Trump administration would propose a 1-month unconditional ceasefire. Both sides stop fighting. And then once that ceasefire is in place, you can start real peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. 2, Zelensky was then supposed to accept that brilliant, amazing Donald Trump proposal with great gratitude, which he did. And then Putin was supposed to reject it. They all knew Putin would reject it. At which point, Trump was supposed to say, finally, I realize Putin is the obstacle, and we're going to start imposing sanctions and doing more to help Ukraine. That was the plan. And it worked until the very last step when Trump didn't say what he was supposed to say. Instead, what he said over it was a couple of days ago, said, well, okay, I get why Putin didn't agree to this, because really he's got to talk to me personally. This can only work when Putin and I sit down and meet together, which threw Putin another lifeline and allowed him to buy even more time. Because now, like, okay, we're waiting for some kind of Putin Trump summit before they even begin a ceasefire. And already the Russians are saying, we have a lot of conditions for the ceasefire. We can't wait to talk about them. And we're back in the morass that that these, I think, well-meaning people around Trump were trying to get us out of.
And I assume, well, do you think at least some intelligence cooperation and some of the already promised arms shipments go to Ukraine?
Yes. Yeah, so the intelligence...
And how worried are you then about, though, running out of some key arms, Patriot batteries and so forth in the summer and the fall? You think they're doing okay? And
I think they're doing okay. The intelligence cooperation's back on, thankfully. And the choreography I just described, at the very least, is not going to lead Trump to be angry at the Ukrainians, because they're, from his point of view, saying all the right things right now. It's just that we needed him to now finally get a little tough on Putin, not just rhetorically, but to actually do something. Putin only respects you if you do something. And that hasn't happened. So, could be worse, but we're not yet at the point where Putin has any incentive to actually stop.
And the people who seem stronger within the administration, a little hard to tell, of course, Vance, I would say, Stephen Miller are the most. We could care less about Ukraine. In fact, kind of hostile to them because they are actually a liberal democracy. Whereas Walzer, I guess, was, at least had been in the House, pretty good on Ukraine, really, till the very end when he had to campaign.
Yeah,
the National Security Advisor is out or is in New York at the UN. Yeah,
and I think Rubio's very little good to say about my old colleague Marco Rubio these days, but I think on Ukraine he's in that group that have been trying to maneuver Trump to a better place, and it requires them to say things like he's the greatest human who ever lived and deserves 10 Nobel Peace Prizes. He's so much better than Biden on Ukraine, and we have to hold our nose and listen to that. But it is, I think, arguably in a good cause. It just hasn't really worked yet because Trump hasn't done what he's supposed to do. And that is to say, I'm fed up with Putin and I'm imposing these sanctions. Lindsey Graham, as you may know, has 70 senators on a sanctions bill. But he won't move it against Trump's will, right? So he needs, being the Lindsey of 2025, he needs Trump's okay to move that legislation. And the moment he has it, then that's real stuff. Because it includes secondary sanctions on countries that are doing business with Russia.
I suppose you still need the executive branch to enforce that, but whatever. I mean, it's better than certainly better than nothing. It is striking how different it is from the first term. Some of us were worried about that before the election and tried to call attention to that. Not very successfully, I suppose. But the first term, the guardrails were more real internally, and obviously, even in the first 2 years when they control Congress as they do now, Congress was more of a check. The Republican Party wasn't nearly as subservient, or wasn't as subservient as it is now, and stuff got done, including some anti-Russia stuff that Trump didn't really want, but he acceded to. But man, an administration with Mattis and Esper at defense, and again, I don't know, McMaster and Bolton in the White House, and Pompeo at State and Haspel at CIA. That's pretty different from an administration with Hegseth and Gabbard and I don't know who else even at this point. So,
yeah, well, I remember in 2017, John McCain saying, and we know what he thought about Trump, but he said that Trump had hired the best foreign policy team of any president of his lifetime.
Interesting.
They all got booted
Yeah.
not too long after that. We passed Russia sanctions legislation in the Congress that prohibited the president from lifting sanctions without going to Congress for permission. It was an anti-Trump bill explicitly. Everybody knew it, and Trump was forced to sign it. And Lindsey Graham pretty much single-handedly saved foreign aid in the first term, including aid for democracy around the world. You mentioned my old little bureau in the State Department, the Democracy and Human Rights Bureau. The budget of that little bureau grew by 4 times during the first Trump administration, even though Trump and Tillerson and Pompeo didn't really care about it. And that was all Republicans in Congress hedging against Trump's instinct to give up on freedom and democracy. None of that is happening now.
And people like Pompeo, whom I knew when he was in Congress, and obviously, wasn't quite where we are, let's say, on democracy and human rights, but certainly not where either of us is in different ways, maybe. But he was not crusading against it either exactly. He was just kind of, it wasn't his thing. But if that was the price of getting other things done, he wasn't, I don't think, averse to having such a bureau, right? They had to redefine human rights a little bit as natural rights. And my old friend Peter Berkowitz had to come in and write some complicated report about this is the right way to understand it as opposed to the way those terrible Obama and types and McCain types understood it. But at the end of the day, you didn't have the kind of the actual turn against it that we've seen with Vance and Hegseth.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Like I could talk to Pompeo, and I felt like I was talking to someone who lived in my reality. Yeah. Even though we had different politics and we disagreed on some things. And yeah, no, these guys, and you saw what Trump said on the subject of standing up for values and human rights in Saudi Arabia. He gave the speech and said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're done with looking into the souls of foreign leaders and dispensing justice for their sins. Which sounded like kind of the pure, amoral, cynical argument that the only thing that should matter in foreign policy is our own selfish interest, which may be oil, it may be trade, it may be security. One problem with the Trump people is they're not even consistent about that, because when it comes to like Germany, they're not saying, well, it's an important ally and we have to focus on our national interests. They beat up on our ally for not respecting the free speech of Nazis. Yeah. So like that's a values issue. It's just the wrong value that they're prioritizing.
I think that's such an important point. I was talking about our friend Bob Kagan about this the other day. And yeah, I mean, America First, I don't agree with it. I think it was disastrous in 1940 and is disastrous today. But you can imagine a principled isolationism, or let's say a sincere isolationism, is what it is. I don't think it's healthy in the world we live in, and it would have the same consequences that the sincere isolationism of the 20s and 30s had. But you would stay out of other countries' internal affairs. You wouldn't judge them. You would make your realpolitik deals. It would be Kissingerianism to an extreme, I suppose. Kissinger wasn't an isolationist because as a realist, he saw that it was foolish. But that's not what they're doing. I come back, for me, I don't know what you thought about this. I tried to scream and yell quite a lot when Musk, who was then a senior White House official, endorsed the AfD in the German elections, and Vance similarly did so. And then they dragged Rubio, I noticed, into doing so recently. That's post-election, but in terms of this legislation,
Rubio's done it repeatedly.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not America First. That's just being for the AfD. I mean, it's literally just being for the AfD. That's what they're doing. No one asked them. They were not an issue really in the elections. They just decided they wanted to be for the, I don't know if it's fair quite to call it a neo-Nazi party. It's pretty fair, honestly, but certainly an anti-Nazi party, and certainly a party that everyone in Europe, including quite conservative parties in Europe, more conservative than you and I would like at all, have excluded from their, coalition in the European Parliament, and excluded from sort of respectable conservatism because it's so extreme and so anti-democratic. to have the American vice president just endorsing them. So that's of a piece of that, but it's not America. It isn't America first isolationism. It's
they're standing up for their moral values at the expense of our relationships with important allies. It's just that their moral values lead them in a very warped and bizarre direction. We're not attending the G20 summit in South Africa because they're angry at how the South African government is treating a fringe movement among the white Afrikaner community. The South African government, obviously not perfect, but like they're in a coalition with the party that represents white South Africans. There are Afrikaners who are in the cabinet who are saying this is totally nuts. This is not actually helping us. So they're doing this on behalf of this kind of radical fringe among the white community in South Africa. Like that's, again, not America first. That's not in our national interest as traditionally defined. This is like a moral crusade, but on behalf of really bad people. That's
a good way of putting it. It's a terrible way of putting it. Sad way of putting it for the U.S., right? I mean, we've supported governments that were very unpleasant in the past, obviously, ranging from right-wing dictatorships during the Cold War to being somewhat friendly with communist China when it was an alternative to the Soviet Union. And I suppose one could debate, everyone debated all those concessions, and equivocations and attempts by Jeane Kirkpatrick to distinguish authoritarian from totalitarian and all that stuff. But at least, I mean, I've got to say, whatever side one was on of those, and whether one was on the side of somewhat appeasing the CCP in China or on the side of appeasing right-wing dictatorships in Latin America and Asia and elsewhere, at least there was a concession that this was an awkward thing to have to do, an unfortunate thing to have to do. And that concession was often sincere. Sometimes maybe people just didn't care and they just said it. But even the saying of it was important, I think. And now we're beyond that, right? I mean, there's not.
Yeah. And I'll tell you that there's one kind of institutional manifestation of that. The State Department is required by law to issue a report every year on human rights in every country in the world. They're supposed to be honest one time a year, even with respect to countries that we decide we have to be doing business with. It could be Saudi Arabia, it could be China, whatever. And it's been done pretty honestly. Like during the second Bush administration, when I was very upset about the old Dick Cheney and sending terrorist suspects to places like Egypt and Syria where they would be tortured, we would quote the State Department human rights reports put out by the Bush administration saying, honestly, there's torture in those countries, widespread and systematic. And now Rubio's saying, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to whittle this report down to the very bare statutory minimum. We're only going to cover the subjects that Congress has explicitly told us we have to. And with respect to about 20 countries that they've named that Trump is kind of close to, there's going to be high-level political review of every single word to make sure that we're not unduly offending those countries. So Viktor Orban's Hungary, Bukele in El Salvador. You can't say that they're mistreating people in their prisons if we're sending people to their prisons. So they're going to censor that out of the annual human rights reports. That hasn't been done before. At the very least, in this one way, we've always tried to be honest about every country in the world, including our authoritarian so-called allies.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and it's worth. When does that report normally come out, or is it?
It's supposed to come out in February. It's very long delayed for this reason. But when it comes out, everyone's going to be looking at what they say about Russia, about El Salvador, about Hungary, certainly the Saudis and Emiratis.
It'd be interesting if on China they do go. Since they sort of want to appear very anti-Chinese, I mean, maybe that will be the one place they'll sort of tell the truth, actually, though maybe not. I don't.
Yeah, they probably will.
Yeah.
But they might be just as tough on Germany.
Well, I wonder if they will add, religious freedom is at risk because they have slightly different somewhat, they don't have a First Amendment. They have a different system, obviously. I mean, they won't say religious freedom's at risk in Israel, a country I like a lot, and which I think is defensible. It's a Jewish and democratic state. They don't have to be quite neutral on every religious matter the way we are. But I'm sure they won't get any kind of criticism, right?
Not for that, no.
No. Or for Gaza. I mean,
so that to me is very sad, because we're going to be perfectly consistent. It's a morally complicated world, but at the very least, we have tried to consistently say that America's on one side of the debate between freedom and tyranny. Like when that guy was holding up the tank in Tiananmen Square, when you had protesters in Iran or Venezuela complaining about a stolen election, when Khashoggi was killed, in all of these iconic human rights moments, when the Berlin Wall came down, like it was clear what side America was supposed to be on. And we would debate amongst ourselves how to respond and how do you balance more kind of pragmatic national interest with our duty to stand by those people. But morally, there was no question what side we were supposed to be on. And we would find at least some way to express that. We've never had in modern times a president who would so overtly say, I don't care. It doesn't matter. And worse, I may be on the other side of that wall. I may be with the guy in the tank, not the guy stopping the tank. Especially if they're willing to gift me a 747.
Well, on that depressing, but I think actually also inspiriting note, as it shows what's at stake in these fights, both over the next 18 months when people might tell themselves they don't have much power, but they don't know, because you don't know what issues catch on and where administrations do get. Some Republicans can desert on the Hill. The public opinion can have an effect on people. As you said, there are internal debates in the administration, and the less bad people might get emboldened. And then certainly for 27, 28, and then certainly for post-November 28.
These issues. I think these issues have some political salience. I want us to be on the side of the good guys in the world, to stand for something good. If you've got, and then there are more special cases, like if you're representing any district with Venezuelans, like in Florida,
right,
or Republican members who are not very happy that their Venezuelan constituents are losing TPS and getting deported back into the hands of the Maduro regime.
No, I think that's really true. And I think the point you made earlier is very important for some of our friends too, and who are trying to despair sometimes about the point. What's the point of even saying things in opposition or passing legislation that may not prevail in the other body, or may not, or even introducing legislation that might fall a little short in the current House or Senate. The damage that's being done abroad can be mitigated if countries believe somewhat credibly, and leaders abroad believe credibly, that this isn't the permanent future of American foreign policy. And in that respect, having the opposition party, which is, after all, half the country basically in the 2024 election and almost half in current Congress, standing up clearly in opposition. I think I think it's really a point that people haven't made enough, honestly, the utility of opposition now, even if it doesn't have effects in the immediate future.
Yeah. And I think it actually can have some deterrent effect on the behavior of foreign countries.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, Tom Malinowski, thank you so much for joining me today. There's so much more to talk about. We didn't even get to Iran, but that's okay. We'll get to that in the next time we do this. But and thanks for helping, for help being on Bulwark, other Bulwark podcasts, and writing for the Bulwark. So, and thank you for keep up the good fight. And thank you all for joining us on the Bulwark on Sunday.